Hey, how's it going, everyone? Today I actually wanted to show you an editor that I've been using for the past few months. I really like it. It's called the 10X editor. Now you can see it's primarily, I think right now, for C and C++ development. So a lot of its features such as jump to definition and autocomplete and that kind of thing are primarily tied to C and C++. Now I know they are adding there are language syntax highlighting features that are getting added every day. So additional languages are being added slowly but surely. But like I said, right now it's primarily for C and C++. I think he said that this is actually developed by a single developer, and he talked about the desire to have a better experience in developing something like Unreal Engine instead of having to use Visual Studio, which tends to be a little bit slow for some operations. You know, he wanted something a little bit better and faster, and so he went and created his own thing. So I'm going to show you the installation process. I'm also going to show you how to do the scripting in 10X, as well as some slightly fancier things, such as setting up a debugger with 10X so that you can kind of integrate the debugger workflow very smoothly with 10X. It's actually pretty cool. I'll show you how all that works as well. But we'll start by just downloading the editor and going from there. All right, so we're just going to click on this download button. Now, actually, while that's downloading real quick, so if you look at this page here, obviously you have the download link that you can click on and download either from here or the home page. You can also check, one of the useful things here is if you look under resources, there's a few different options, but there's the old versions that you can download as well. So if you download a newer version and for some reason you have a bug in it, or it's just not working like it was before for whatever reason, you can go back and download a previous version just by downloading one of these here. So he makes that pretty easy. And again, this is just for maybe if you're having some sort of issue with a new version that he just released and you want to retro back to a different version. The pricing model is also here that you can look at. So you can see he does subscription-based licenses here. Now, I think you can also purchase, so if you do like a yearly license, you can purchase it once for the year, and then after a year is up, I believe you can cancel it and still keep the 10X editor without any future installs. So I think that is a option for you if you want to do that and not have to be tied to a yearly subscription. But again, you just won't get all the updates for it. And with that out of the way, so I'm just going to show you now the actual installation process. I've already uninstalled it, so this is going to be a completely fresh install for 10X. So it's pretty simple. I mean, you're just going to click install, accept. It'll, obviously it's going to put you in the default path here. It wants you to install it, so we'll just leave it there, and I'll hit continue. And it's going to go ahead and install. Now, once it installs, part of the installation process here is so you have your main 10X exe that's going to be installed in that location it mentioned earlier, which was, again, it was in your C drive, and it was, I believe, program files, and then the pure dev software and 10X. So this is where the actual 10X exe is installed, and you can see the application here. We have it, and it's opened up. Once you download it and install it, it's going to start in the trial phase, so you'll get 30 days. You can try it out. This is as of 10/23/2023, so if he changes that at all in the future, that might be a little different than what I'm showing you. But right now, you get 30 days to try it out, and then you can make a purchase from there if you like it. So again, this is where the actual exe is installed, but it will install like the settings files, the key mappings, and the scripts that it uses. It uses Python. It runs Python scripts. So it comes with some default scripts, and that all is actually going to be located in a slightly different location. It's under your app data folder. If you're not familiar with your app data folder, it's usually going to be in the C drive under users. Your name, username, whatever that is. You're going to click that, and you're going to click app data. App data, I believe, is a hidden folder, so if you don't see it, you have to make sure that hidden items is checked. So you can see if I uncheck it, it's gone. If I check it, hidden items comes back, so it's your app data folder, and then it's going to be under roaming and 10X. So again, this is where it's going to store a lot of its scripts and setting files and that kind of thing that it uses. And whenever you want to write your own scripts in Python, you basically would just write a Python script, and this is where you're going to place it. And again, we'll go over a little more about that later, but I just wanted to mention this real quick. And then, like I was saying before, you also have the settings files in here. So you have your key mapping, so your key bindings file, as well as your settings file, which, you know, you could set like your font size and tab spacing and all different kinds of things that you could set for the editor. So that's all done within this folder. I'll actually show you, you can modify these really easily with 10x. So you can do it within 10x and just hit save, and those changes are going to just occur automatically. So I'll show you that here real quick. So if we go back to 10x, open it up. So we just, you know, opened it randomly here from the desktop. If I hit, I think it's Shift-Alt-O, you'll see it just pulls up a file list. Probably has the 10x folder here as the default when you don't have a workspace or anything like that. So we're just going to search for the settings. So you can see here's the settings file that I was showing earlier, and it just has a bunch of settings you can do. You can go through this yourself. It's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, you got font size, you know, different, we have, what do we got? UI scale, so scale of like different windows and things like that for the UI system. And a bunch of different things. The biggest thing is, like I was saying, you can do, so right now we have the font size at 12. If I wanted to change that, let's just make it super small, hit save, and you can see it just automatically updates it. So that's really nice. You can just go to the file, you can modify it, and then just see the changes automatically within the editor itself just by saving the file. Same thing with the key mappings file. So this time I'm just going to go to the settings window. So if you just go to the top of 10x, we'll click the settings tab and key bindings, and here's all the bindings. So you can see we have you know, Control S for save file, Control O for open file. So if I hit Control O, it will bring up this window to open a file. So you have a bunch of those commands as well. One of the biggest things you'll use too, so if you don't have a command bound to a certain key combination, you can look at the commands themselves with Control Shift X, and you have a command window. So you can just do, I think it does like a fuzzy search of the different commands that 10x has, so you can use that as well to pull up and use a command. What I want to do real quick actually is we're going to show, I have my own custom key mapping and settings files so that I can navigate through 10x pretty easily myself since I'm used to these certain key bindings. You can go through and do different things yourself if you want. I'm just going to load that here real quick in the background. Okay, so behind the scenes here, I just went and downloaded my custom key mappings and local settings files that I have stored in a GitHub repo. So if we look at the folder here, so basically the files that I'm saving when I just want to load them up and load my custom settings, say I re-downloaded 10x and I have a fresh 10x install and I just want to pull in my local settings and key mappings files so that I have custom changes in here that I like. These are the only two files I worry about. And then I also do custom Python scripts that I have. So basically whenever I say I re-downloaded 10x, I would just initialize a Git repo, add the remote repo that is holding these custom files, and then I just pull them in. And basically, again, when I pull it in, I'm adding in these additional commands that I'm using for Python, and I'm also pulling in my own custom key mappings and local settings files that I just overwrite that are currently in here. And that works pretty well. So the local settings file as compared to the settings file, this basically will just, anytime it finds a local settings with certain settings, it's going to but it's going to supersede the settings file. So there's a general settings file that's going to be this one here that has all the different stuff that you need, that 10x has settings for, right? And then you have your local settings file, which can basically will keep all those defaults that are already in the shared settings file, and then you can override it with your own custom ones one at a time. So you can see I only have a few things that I like to use to overwrite the shared settings. So 10x will look at this first, make sure these are all set, and then it will go through and then do all the other defaults that I haven't specified. So again, those are the two files that I like to modify, and that gives me a good custom 10x experience. All right, so now I'm going to show you, I have a quick project that's set up here. If we look at the directory that I'm in, this project just has a simple build file that's going to run a simple C program that we have, and we have a debug file. This is actually used for RemedyBG. It just sets up a debugging environment for our main.c file, and we'll show that a little bit later when we set up the debugger with 10x. This is actually just a temporary file that 10x had put in there, so I'm just going to remove that real quick. Just ignore that for now. Okay. All right, now I have 10x set up in my environment variable, so I have the path for the 10x exe set up in there, so that means I can just type 10x and it will run the exe. Now 10x also gives you the option in the command line to just open up the current directory within 10x. So if I do 10x dot, that means that whatever directory I'm in, just open up those files and everything in 10x. So we'll hit enter, and you can see now that we have our project here opened up in 10x. So if we see, I can just build this real quick, this project, and it's going to take my C file, build it into a program, a working program. If we check the folder, we can see the bin folder that generates our exe, and then again, I can run this and say something like remedy, and I can run our debug. Okay, so here's that file, and then hit F5 and we can run it. Now, we'll just close that out here. All right, so again, we just opened this up in 10x through the command line. We don't have a workspace here yet. We just opened up this folder in 10x, but a workspace file is something that we can create. We can actually create that by going up here to the settings, and you'll see workspace settings. So workspace is just like if you used any editor before, usually they have this sort of thing that you can put in your project that's going to store certain commands or other things that you can use for a quick keyboard shortcuts and to run your program or to debug your program with a quick shortcut. So right now, like I said, the build command, I have the build file that I could just put in here. And it's going to take that, it's going to, whatever current directory this is saved in, it's going to run this command. So just like I ran this on the command line here, I could just put it in there, and that means that now the build command, which is a command in 10x. So if I hit OK here, and if I go to the command window, and you see the build commands that you can have, I forget the exact one. So if I look at my key mappings, what do I have? So toggle build panel and build. So this is actually, it's a custom Python script that I did. So this is part of my custom commands. So if I open that up, what this does is you can execute, and we can look at this a little further later, but basically I'm just executing the build active workspace command. So that's the command. So build active workspace. So that's the command I'm running when I hit Alt M. So when I do that, you can see it runs that build command. And again, this was just a custom Python file that I showed you a little earlier. I did this quick function here so that I could toggle between pulling up that, hitting Alt M again to take it away. So it's just, a simple thing there that I like to do. So I have that set up like that. But anyway, so again, we had our workspace settings. We had this set up to the build command. You can see there's also a run command. We have that's a rebuild command. We do have a run command as well. We have a debug command. So again, these are all commands that 10x has that you can put in whatever your custom command is, and that command will be run whenever those commands are run. So rebuild. So if we look at the rebuild command, oops, it's the output. Let's come to this. So there's a rebuild all, I believe. Rebuild all. So that's the command that you can run if you want to. If you can see right now, if I were to run it, nothing happens because I don't have anything telling 10x what to do when I hit rebuild. So again, that's something that I can set up here. I could say, okay, so when you're in, now actually let me show you. So if I go back to the command line, so we have our bin folder. Let's make this a little clearer. So you can see we have our bin folder, right? that bin folder is holding the exe. When you run a rebuild command, what you want to happen is to delete that whole folder, just say get rid of that, and we're going to rebuild our project and put that into a new bin folder. So if you want to do that on the command line, you would do remove directory /s, and then you can do the bin folder. Are you sure? Yes, and it'll delete that folder from our directory. You can also do it so that you don't, let me just show you real quick. So we'll rebuild it. We can remove the directory. /s just means delete the directory and any subdirectories in it. And then you can do /q, which means do not prompt me that am I sure? Yes, I'm sure. Just go ahead and do it, please. And we put the bin, and you can see it'll just run that. So with that in mind, so we have this command, right, that we can use on the command line. So just like before with the build command, and we'll just build our project again real quick. If we go to settings, active workspace, we will basically just take that same command and we'll paste it in the rebuild. So it's going to remove the bin directory, but again, for a rebuild command, we'd like to clear it out if it is there and then rebuild it. So we could say and build.bat. So that's the rebuild command that we have set up in our workspace. So I want to hit OK. And I go here and say we then run that rebuild. Now it goes ahead and actually deletes that bin folder and then rebuilds the project for us. Now actually, real quick, I wanted to mention that if you remember, we had opened up 10x via the command line here. So we just did the 10x dot to open up our project. We could have done this via, a shortcut, so we could have done it via this link here instead. The reason I'm bringing this up is sometimes programs have slightly different behaviors when you run them from the command line versus if you're just double clicking it on a shortcut or something. So you could see that with 10x, we weren't prompted to save the workspace settings file. So once we set this and hit OK, there wasn't a prompt to save it or anything. So we don't have anything actually saved right now, but you could see that we have this sort of temporary file sitting in our directory right now. So you could see that here. It doesn't have an extension. It's just this weird sort of temporary file sitting there. I believe that because we ran it from the command line, 10x is just creating this file that helps keep track of the workspace settings. But that's not actually the settings file that we want to be saving. It should be, or I'm sorry, that's not actually the workspace file that is actually we want to be saving and using and double clicking to open up our project. So we're going to, real quick, I'm going to close this out. We're not going to run this from the command line. We're going to get rid of this file because it's just garbage. So now I'm going to run 10x from the shortcut. And we'll just open up our folder this way. So we're going to go, I already am navigated here. So we're going to have our same folder we were just in. We're going to open that up. If we go back to settings in the workspace, we deleted that temporary file. So you can see there's nothing currently here right now. So we'll just, again, create those commands that we had. Remove dir /s/q bin. All right. And now this time we're going to say OK. And we're going to save the workspace. Okay, so now once we click the save the workspace, before, I don't think I actually showed it, but if I were to try to save the workspace from within that command line, whenever we had it open, it wouldn't have prompted us with this prompt, but now it does. So we can call it the same thing as our directory, simple sandboxes, and you can see when it's an actual workspace file, it's going to be simple sandboxes.10x and hit OK. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what was going on with that before. That's my guess, that it had that weird temporary file in there. But you can see now that we saved it, we actually have the 10x workspace file saved in our project. So if I were to close that out, what we could actually do now is just double click this and it'll open that project up right away, right? So that's handy, and we still have all of our settings saved from before. I also want to mention that, again, we are running this workspace settings file, and you can see these commands that we're running. We're just listing the commands themselves. So we're assuming that the commands are going to be run from the current working directory, which is this directory here. probably not best to always assume that, because there's things we'll do coming up here where we're going to be running commands like the debug command. It's going to be actually passed to another program. So either Remedy or Visual Studio might be running this command, and they might not always assume what the directory is. So it could be useful to specify the absolute path of the directory that we're using. Now, like Visual Studio, if you've ever used that before, you have these little variables, you can call them. It's 10x's way of providing you ways to just say, okay, use the current workspace or use the current directory of the workspace file. So wherever it finds the workspace file for this project, that is the path that it'll use to run whatever commands you put in here. So we could, if we wanted to, for example, for this build.bat, to use the current directory that the workspace file is in, which is again in our root directory. So it's just in the root directory, which is also with this build.bat file. We could just put the root workspace directory like that. Okay, and we'll hit OK. Now, I did something on purpose here. You'll see if I try and run it, it's going to say that it's not recognized as a command. And you'll notice this is because if you've ever tried to run commands before on the command line or anywhere else, spaces between words causes problems, right? The command line doesn't understand when something has a space between it. If you're talking about a folder or a specific command, it's going to assume that you're just trying to run a command. So it doesn't realize the rest of this is connected to that first word here, user with the space. So it doesn't understand that that is a directory that we're talking about. So in order to do that, we have to put quotes around that command. So we would do the same thing here. We'll just put quotes around our command here. So it's telling the command line basically that whole thing is a directory path, and the last thing is the actual command you want to run. So if we run it now, you can see everything works fine. So that's something you just want to make sure you're doing when you're running these things. And if you get little weird errors like that, that you have things specified correctly for the Windows command line environment. So same thing here. If we wanted to make this more explicit with the directory path for bin, we could do the same thing. So we would copy, this, put it with our bin folder. Okay, slash, and quote, hit OK. Now we should be able to rebuild still, and we get the same command going. All right, so moving on, real quick, I want to mention this is you can see it's a workspace tree, so it's just the folder directory we have here with our files. So you can see the build.bat file, our C file, and this tree is just mimicking our current directory. You'll notice that if we were to create a file outside of 10x, so we can create a new file in 10x. If I were to do the command new text file, I could create a file that way, and then I would just save it, name it, and it would be saved in our directory, and you would see it updated here. But let's say we did that a different way, and we went to our actual directory and we added a file that way, new text file.txt, and we hit OK. It doesn't populate here. So right now what you have to do is you would just click on this little box. This just signifies this is the workspace file for our project. Left click and sync folder. And then once you do that, it'll now update what's in the current directory with things. This will probably change. My guess is this will change sometime in the future to maybe have more of an automatic sync. But right now, that's what you would have to do. You can see there's some other options here. I'm not going to go over everything they have. He also has support for virtual folders, which if you used Visual Studio, you should be familiar with that. Basically, it's just a folder you create that 10x knows about, but not your file system. So if I were to create a virtual folder here, now I think I actually have to disable the sync in order to get this to work. Yeah, so basically if I created a virtual folder in here, it's not necessarily a folder that would show up here. It's just a way to organize your project within 10x itself and not muddy up your actual directory. One other thing I want to mention here is you can see right now we have some syntax highlighting, right? And again, this editor, I think I mentioned it before in the beginning of the video, is mainly a C and C++ editor, meaning that it's going to support the C and C++ languages, more so C++. I think C just kind of by default works pretty well just because it's so similar to C++. So a lot of the stuff that works in C++ works in C. At least I really haven't had many issues with C working in this editor. He has plans in the future, I believe, to add more support for more languages like C# and Rust, but he wanted to get these two languages done, or I'm sorry, the C++ language basically done first. And he has his own custom parser for that. So, things like if you were to do a dot operator, it's going to automatically bring up members of the struct and, go to definition. We don't really have a big project, so I won't do that right now, but basically you should know that if you hit whatever key binding you have, go to definition. So you can even see I hit that on printf and it knows about the stdio header for C. So it just went to the definition right now for printf. So you can do things like that with the current parser and everything. But with other language support, there isn't much right now. Minus syntax highlighting, I know there's some language files that it might have been created by the community that have just created ways to do syntax highlighting for other languages. So there is that is available. But as far as major support, I think that is coming down the pipe still. And the next thing I want to look at is the scripting. So the Python scripting that you can use within the editor. If you remember, we have let's just close that. We have the Python scripts folder within 10x within that roaming folder we looked at earlier. And these are where a lot of the Python scripts can be found. Now you can see I have already my own custom scripts that I have in here, but let's say you didn't. You're just opening up this file path and you want to create your own Python scripts to use. Now, I can actually go in, we can look real quick at one of my custom script files. So I have my custom commands that you saw in that folder. And these are just some quick things I did to help me with my editing here in 10x. So the toggle build panel that we saw earlier where I can build the active workspace and close it, right, was one of them. And again, this is just in that file, my custom commands. So let's say you wanted to add a command, you didn't have any other special files in here, you would just go to new and we'll just say test script and py, so it's Python. Now you don't, 10x comes with Python installed. So once you download 10x, you will be able to do Python scripts. So you don't have to download Python separately. It should all be included within 10x when you're using it in the 10x environment. So this test script file, I don't have to do anything else special. I could just create the script. The only thing I don't remember is if I have to reload the editor to get it to recognize the script file. I don't think so. Let's see. So if I do let's see if I resync. I don't think that'll work. Let's reload that. All right, so now you can see that it loaded up the test script that I just added, and I can open that up. And once you're in here, you'll notice from the My Custom Commands, you can just start doing a Python thing. And the simplest thing is we can just do a print statement to make sure things are working. So we could just define a function in Python, and we'll just say test, and we'll print hello. I'm really not a Python developer, so the amount of Python I know is the amount that I've needed to know to get stuff to work in 10x. So this just defines a function. It's going to print hello. And then in order to see if this works, what we could do is we can go to our key mappings file. We can just take a key combination and we can call that function directly. All right, so we could say, instead of control X being cut, we could say test, which is my function. And the way you view the output of the Python scripts is you can go to view and 10x output. That's the window you want. So we have the 10x output window, and you can see whenever you load a project, it's also going to show you some startup processes that it's done and how long parsing took and that kind of thing. But again, we have the control X right now that's going to run this test script that's going to print the hello. So if I do that, there you go. You see hello. So obviously the really nice thing about this is it was super easy to create a script. All I had to do after I dropped in the file and reloaded, now I have this file in here. I can just start defining whatever functions I want and they'll just work, right? I mean, I'll be ready to use. Now, you can see in my commands folder that we have an import N10X. So this is, one of the modules that 10X comes with that you can use. This is the Python commands that it has that you can use from your own Python script. So this is the the commands that it provides. So if I want to use some of 10X's commands, we can do that and say n10x editor, right? And then we can use whatever commands we want, whatever is provided to us. You can see I had a couple of them here where we had the build active workspace. So let's say we wanted to do the execute command rebuild all, right? That was one of the commands that we could use. We could hit save, and that's called another test. So if I go here, Control X, another test, which should rebuild. All I had to do was save it, Control X, and you could see actually, so Python, like I said, it's going to print any errors and that kind of thing that you have with your commands. Now you can see on this one that the name n10x is not defined. So I think the issue was I had a lowercase x and I needed an uppercase. So we'll save that again, and we should just be able to do this. And you can see that rebuild command worked. So that's really the about it for the Python scripting. It's pretty simple. The things you want to learn obviously are maybe some of the different commands that you can use and some of the things that 10x provides you in order to do various things with your Python scripts. So if we look, I have my own Vim file that I'm using. So there are things like callbacks that you can use. So you can see we can listen for any keys that are being pressed and then perform certain actions. And I think there's like a initialization, call on main thread is another function you can use to initialize if you need to perform some initialization actions. I pass in the function here that I want 10x to just call on its main thread whenever it loads up. Like I said, there's more stuff like that. I haven't gone too deep into the Python scripting, but if I wanted to, I basically know what I need to know, right? I mean, it's super easy to use, and I really like that about this editor. Doesn't take a whole lot to get scripting up and working, and it's pretty powerful. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do, and more functionality is being added to the scripting every day. All right, now I'll show you. So there's a way to get some already created scripts, and we are going to download one of them and we're going to try it out, which is the RemedyBG debugger support script. So this script allows you to run RemedyBG from 10x, and you can actually set breakpoints within 10x, and they will be set in RemedyBG as well. So they're basically synced so that it will make your process a little faster whenever you're creating programs and debugging. It's actually pretty nice. So I'll show you that here with 10x. So if you go to the website again, the 10x editor, right? On the main page, if you go to resources, and I believe it's report bug, and if you click either GitHub issues or report a bug, it's going to take you to the issues page. Now, the actual page for the scripts, if you just go back to 10x to the main page, you can see it has some different directories here you can look up, and the one we're going to want here is the Python scripts. So if we click that, these are the different Python scripts that have been created that we can add and use. So here's the RemedyBG scripts. I'm just going to show you the one that's going to get us to what we want, which is the RemedyBG.py. There is a description about how it works, but I'm going to show you how it kind of works here and how to get things up and running. So the first thing we'll do is, I don't know, the easiest thing, I'm just going to create the RemedyBG py. Okay, and then we'll just copy and paste. Okay. Into the file. Right. Now you see that I had an option for the 10x notepad. you'll see, so there's 10x and 10x Notepad, so it comes with both when you install 10x. I think the Notepad is basically just like a lighter version of 10x, so if you want to use it more for like quick operations, it might not be as fully featured, but he provides that as a, another application that you can use if you want. I really haven't used it much. I kind of use it sometimes just for quick things like that if I'm not worried about opening up a giant project or anything. But that's what that is. So if you see stuff like that, just know that it comes with kind of both 10x and the 10x Notepad executables. All right, so I have the RemedyBG. It should be in this file now that we can use. And in order to use this, so let's go here. We'll leave this open for now. All right, now again, I think he mentioned in there that once you do add a script file, you will restart the editor. So we're going to restart. And you can see how quick it is, right? Just to open and close it, which is really nice. Again, this is versus, no, we don't need it. Versus something like Visual Studio, which every time you load it up takes multiple seconds. It's a little ridiculous. So on this, we're gonna open up that workspace again. And now we're gonna search for the Remedy script. And here's that script. And again, it kind of goes over some of this, the process of getting this set up in 10x, so you can read through that if you want. There are some things that commands that it provides you that you can use to get extra functionality out of it, but we'll show you some of the main stuff here. Okay, and then just so I don't forget to mention, if you're unfamiliar with RemedyBG, it's just a debugger for Windows, a x64 debugger that you can use. It's basically an alternative to something like Visual Studio, so you can use that to debug your programs. So again, that debugger can be integrated here with 10x, and one of the first things you want to do, so you see we have our simple program here. If we want to be able to just jump into the debugger from 10x, what we need to do first is go to our settings file, or my local settings, sorry, this is the ones that I have. That's going to override the shared settings, right? You can see I already set it up here. This is the main thing you need to do for Remedy. You need to set the hook to be true. So this basically tells Remedy to not use whatever the default debugger would be, which in this case would be Visual Studio, which I'll show next on how to set that up. But you can see that 10x has the commands like start debugging. So those automatically default to a Visual Studio setup if you're going to use the Visual Studio debugger. So you need to set this hook to make sure that we're getting the remedy that we're going to be using for our debugger. And you can also see that when we installed the Python script for Remedy, now we have the RemedyBG debugging options. So we have start debugging, but it's RemedyBG, so that's going to start it through Remedy, and a couple other ones here. The other one you might need to do is a RemedyBG path, and this basically gives you the option to set the path to your Remedy exe. So let's say you had it in some random folder, right? And RemedyBG.exe. That's how you would set the path. Now, actually, I don't think you need quotes here. You could test it, but I don't believe you do. So you would just set the path here to the RemedyBG exe that you have it installed, and then that's what the script will use to load the executable and run the debugger. I have it set up in my path variables, so it's already set up to where I can just type in Remedy, right? So I can just do this, and it'll open up Remedy because it knows where to find it. So I set that in my environment variables. So I'm just going to keep it that way for now. So all we have to do then is just set the hook to true. If we go back to our main program and we go to settings. So if you see, if we try and run here, so if I go to the command and I say RemedyBG start debugging, you can see it says the debug command is empty. So this is something that we have to set up in our workspace before we can use the Remedy file. I'm almost going to clear this out real quick. So if we go to, we have to go to our workspace, right? So our active workspace. So it's talking about this field here. We just have to fill this out. What we're going to fill it out with is just a call to the RemedyBG.exe. Now, we'll go in a little later. The way the script is set up now, I'm actually not sure how important this is for actually running Remedy. I just know that it requires you to put to fill in this field with something. So I'm going to put in the RemedyBG exe. It might not make sense now, but we'll show a little later. We're going to put that in there, and then we're going to describe the path to the exe. So this is going to basically paste whatever we put in here. It's going to put it in the RemedyBG executable that gets run so that it knows where to find our exe to actually start debugging. Again, we'll use these variables that 10x provides us to get access to the folder path. So I'm going to put the root directory workspace, which is just in our parent directory, or I'm sorry, our root directory, and then from that directory we go to the bin folder, and then we go to the main.exe. Okay, so we set the exe path, we set this debug command, we just put it to remedybg.exe, we hit OK. All right, and then we go back to main. Now you can see I have a breakpoint set. So if I were to run rdbg start debugging, boom, it pops right into the debugger, and we can just continue and start debugging our program. So again, this is nice because you don't, obviously that'll automatically switch for you between this debugger and Remedy, or I'm sorry, this editor and Remedy, so that you can kind of more smoothly work and then just go back and forth between editing and debugging. And there's a couple other cool features with this syncing. So I can remove a breakpoint here, and you can see it removes the breakpoint from Remedy. And I can also, I could set it again, run it. Now, I did that really quick because I did I have it actually set to F5 for start debugging. So if we go to my key mappings file, we can see, I think I have it at the bottom here. Yeah, so we see I have F5 set to the start debugging command. So that means that, I can just go in here, I can change things, do whatever I want, set a couple breakpoints, and then just hit F5, and it's going to jump to our Remedy debugger. Right, so this makes things a little bit quick and easy for us when debugging and creating our program. Okay, so as I mentioned, there is this debug command that the script was requiring for us to put in something. I don't actually think this matters, so I think we could just put in garbage here and then hit F5, and you'll see things will keep working. So just remember, these are community scripts, so they're just developed by different community members, and sometimes there's going to be bugs here and there in these scripts. In this case, this one's not a huge deal. I'm actually going to show you, we're going to look at that script real quick and just show you kind of what's going on there. I did reach out to the developer of the script, and it was actually concerning, which I'm going to show in a second, how to load up session files. So he talked about developing a way to kind of have a way to load up session files instead of, you'll see right now. So a session file in Remedy is just a workspace that you saved in Remedy. So it might have certain variables and things like that that are saved in here that you can load up with Remedy. So you have the save workspace, and you might have a certain setup in Remedy that you want saved and to open again. And right now the functionality doesn't come with this script out of the gate, but I can show you how to do it easily. That kind of ties into this debug command field. So we can see, again, if we leave it blank, I hit OK, I hit, oops, sorry. Let's see, did I not save it? So if I go to settings, and actually it works probably because we probably could just restart the editor and it'll probably not work again. Let's see. So we'll do the, all right, hit F5, and you can see now so for whatever reason, it probably, I don't know, the caches what we had in the debug command. I don't really know. But again, now it says debug command is empty because we have that field empty. But if we go and look at the actual script itself, so if we look at the Remedy script, the way Python works, again, I'm not super familiar with Python, but we can see we have the RemedyBG session. So that is the main session class that a lot of these things are going to run through. So you can see different functions for it. And the one we want to look at is actually the open. Oops. I just had it. The open function. There it is. Okay, so we have this open function, and we can see, so this is where the arguments for the executable for Remedy get run that is going to be responsible for opening up Remedy and starting our session. You can see there's some different things in here. There's the server name. So Remedy allows you to use pipes. So that's how it's able to communicate. How 10x is able to communicate with Remedy is through the pipes interface for Windows. If you're not too familiar with them, I'm not really either. Like I said, it's just a way for different executables to communicate with one another. And we can actually, so if you're in these scripts, you can print basically what you want to see into this log window. So this is the 10x output log. So if we go ahead and clear, you can see I'm going to print the arguments. So basically this should print out the final line that's going to be executed by this script that's going to open up Remedy and debug. So if we just hit run real quick, we can see what that is printing out. Actually, it didn't run because I don't have... So you can see why it's not running, because we have the debug command. So you can see this editor.debug command. So that is provided by 10x, and this is a way to get that command field out of the workspace file. So it's pulling from this debug command and pulling in a string here for that debug command. And you can see in the Remedy script that if it's empty, that's where we get the message, right? We get this show debug command is empty and yada, yada, yada. And that's what's happening right now because we have that empty. So again, this debug command as of right now, it's only used in those two spaces. So all it's checking to see right now is if that field is populated, but I don't actually think it does anything with that command. You could see that it runs the executable via the RemedyBG options variable or class, and that executable was set earlier. So that was set via the path. If you had set up a path to the RemedyBG file here, if you remember, it was the RemedyBG.path, and if you had a path to the Remedy file, you would put it there. Or if not, it just assumed it was in your environment variables and it just set it to the RemedyBG.exe. So that's what this is right here. So it already had that path to the executable set. So that's why it's part of the command here. And it's not using this debug command for whatever reason. So like I said, I don't know if this was just a minor bug. It was something that was overlooked, who knows. But again, if we set our debug command just so it runs through this part of the code, we'll just set it to blah, and then we'll hit run. Okay, now we'll go back to our window. You can see right here, so this is the actual command that gets run. RemedyBG server name. This sets up the instance for the pipes, and then we have our main exe. So this is what's getting passed to the remedies, so that whenever we run our program, it has that path to the exe program. That's where it gets set right for the command, so it knows what to run. Okay, so that's all done through that command here. So you can imagine, since we kind of know where this is coming from now, how we might be able to modify this to get what we want from this command. So for one thing, we know that it doesn't seem like that that option really matters. So what I can do right now is actually just remove this message that's showing that the command is empty, or I can even I could still show it. Well, I don't want to show the message box. I mean, we could just turn this into a printf, just showing it in the log window in case we want to realize, oops, that's my C coming out there. So we could just put this as a printf, and instead of returning false, we'll just keep going through. So this will log to the window that nothing has been set in our debug command field, which I'll take off right now, hit OK. And that's just going to be like a warning, essentially, right? But we'll still run the rest of the code. So now I can just go here, hit F5, and everything still runs, right? And then if we go back to the application, you could just say debug command is empty, but who cares? We were able to run it anyway. What I was saying earlier now, the other thing that you can do with Remedy is you can open up a session file. So right now I have the debug session file in here, right? Debug.rdbg, that's the session file. for Remedy that you can use, and that's where I have maybe like a variable saved or a certain layout saved. So I can open that up with Remedy by just doing something like this, right? And that'll open up. Now you can see I just had this as an example to show that I had typed this in for my watch window before and I had saved it, and this was part of the session file. And before, when I was running it from the 10x editor, that wasn't happening, right? If I was in here and I hit F5, that variable isn't there because it wasn't loading up my session file. This was starting up a new instance of Remedy and then just going from there. So you can see that if we wanted to get that session file in there, we have to put that into the command somehow. So we can do that right now really easily. So instead of, this is sort of just a hack, and like I said, I talked to the developer of the script, and he said he might have a more official way to where you're maybe doing it in your settings, and you're going to say, instead of RemedyBG, path, you could say session path or something like that, which means give a path to a session you want to use, and we'll load that up on startup when we're running Remedy. And that can be like an optional thing you can do. But again, in the meantime, what we can do is I can just go here and we can put that in the debug command for now, since that is going to pull from that debug command field, and it doesn't seem like it's used for much anything else. So if I do the debug.rdbg, this is the session file for Remedy. If I put that in the debug command, that means that that is going to pull now into this debug command variable. And then we can put it, I believe it just would need to go after the self.name. So if we say debug command, just like that, okay. This might need to be a string. Let's see, we'll go ahead and run it. Okay, so it didn't take. Well, actually, this will give us a way to debug this. So say you run into an error and you want to debug this yourself. So the problem is, so what we can do actually is I can just do a printf again on the args, and we can see what it prints to this window. Let me clear this out just to make it a little clearer as to why it's not working. So again, we hit F5 to run our debugger, nothing happens. It's just not loading up properly. No name pipe can be opened, so if something's going wrong, we can look at our command here since we printed it out, which is right here. We can see blah, 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 blah. So you can see how right here it puts the session file right at the end of the server name, and it's kind of all one line, so it's not recognizing this as a separate command, right? So this is how we just debugged it, right? We realized that we didn't do it properly here. We forgot the space essentially. So what I could do is just add a space here, right? So I can do plus space there. So that'll add a space between the debug command and the server name, and that should be enough for us to actually run. And that'll run in our debug remedy session file. So if I hit F5, boom, there we go. So you can see that this opened up the session file. Here's our var +3, and now we have opened up our session file. So again, that's just a quick way to get it working and maybe make you understand exactly what's going on here and how you can kind of modify things yourself. And then you can look through the rest of the file, and you could probably make it a more official fix for yourself. Maybe save this to your own remedy file while he's still working on getting an official release for it. I actually do that myself, where I just have a separate remedy file that I can add stuff to it and merge in his changes if I want to, that kind of thing. All right, so real quick, so there's other things you can do with the debugger besides just starting it and running it, right? You can stop it from here, you can restart it. So if you look at our key mappings, we see we have a stop debugging, just Shift F5, and a restart debugging, Control Shift F5. So if I were to run the debugger, let's see it's running here, and say I switch back to the editor, I can still hit, say, Control Shift F5, and that'll restart this, right? So I can restart it from 10x here if I want to, and it'll restart it back to the start. You can also, this might be harder to show here. Let me see, I'm gonna have to break this down into 2 windows, I think, to really see this. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so say we're in 10x, we hit F5. It focuses on the remedy exe when you hit that, but we can go back to 10x, and then we can just hit the F10 to step over. And you can see how they're kind of synced, right? They kind of go together when you do that. So that's another thing that's really cool. And again, that's the RDBG step over. So you basically have that functionality that would be here if you were just working within RemedyBG. You can do that from 10x, so you can kind of step into, step over, and that's going to reflect here in Remedy in real time. And we can close that out, and then I just have this bound to a key binding of Shift F9 to just clear all the breakpoints. You can see all the breakpoints have been cleared, and the command I did there was RemedyBG. What was it? I think it's remove breakpoint or remove all breakpoints. Let me go to the key mapping. Yeah, remove breakpoints from file. Or no, remove all breakpoints. That's the one. So I just did Shift F9 to do that. This just removes it from one specific file, but you can see how that syncs between Remedy as well. So you can do all that kind of stuff here within 10x and Remedy, and you can also do this with Visual Studio, which I will show you here now. Okay, so to use the Visual Studio debugger and work it from 10x, the first thing we're going to do, if you came from the RemedyBG section that we just did, we're going to remove the hook because we're no longer going to be using RemedyBG. We're going to be using Visual Studio, and by default 10x will do its debug commands through Visual Studio. So if you're unfamiliar with the debug commands, 10x has a few different ones. So you can have start debugging, which is just going to start debugging, jump into the debugger, and then you can step through. It also has stop debugging, restart debugging. So these are all 10x commands that communicate with, in this case, will be Visual Studio, that you can run the debugger and do different things. All right. Okay, so I already have Visual Studio installed on this machine. So if we look here, we see I have Visual Studio 2022 installed. Now for a normal project, if you're just starting, you would just go through Visual Studio, create a new project via one of these options here, or a new solution, whatever. Since I already have a project directory created, I just want to create an empty solution file, and then we'll just add a project that way. So it might be a little different than what you're used to. You by no means have to do it this way. I'm just going to do it this way because I already have a folder directory here, and I just want to create an empty solution file, which is actually a little more difficult than you might think, or at least it's not as readily intuitive as you might believe. I tried it a couple different ways, couldn't get it to work, and I eventually found a solution in order to do that. So real quick before I show that way, if we look at the installer here, I'm just going to show you what I have installed, which if I go to modify, we can see the components I have installed from Visual Studio when I first installed it. So I just basically have the C++ tools. I have the regular C++ tools for application development. I also selected the game development tools, so I occasionally will dabble in Unreal. So I just installed this just in case I could use some of that for Unreal. And then I also installed the .NET desktop development environment. So even though I don't use any I don't typically program in C#, I can get access to its tools, and then more importantly, the .NET framework and environment, which is usually required for a bunch of things like Unreal. So that's what I have installed with Visual Studio, and what the .NET environment allows me to do is create that empty solution file I mentioned. So if I go here and I type in .NET new sln, name it tutorial, that just creates that solution file within that project directory. So we can actually see it here. Here's that solution file. So that's just a quick way to create an empty solution for us for in our project. So if I go to our folder, and if we double click this solution file, we'll see we can open it up within Visual Studio, and here's our empty solution. Now we need to, with any Visual Studio project, you have to add an actual project here and put any files that you want in that project within the virtual folders for organization. You can. So I'm going to do that here real quick. So the first thing is just creating a new project. So we're going to add new project. I just want an empty project that we're going to add. We'll just call it tutorial project, right? And we'll just add it in there. So you can see here are our virtual folders. So these are just organizational folders that we can use within Visual Studio that our file system knows nothing about. So we can go ahead, and then again, these are just used for organizational purposes within Visual Studio itself. So I can just add an existing item, which is that C file that I already have in my project, that main.c, right? So we can just add that in that way, and we have that set. And so we'll try and test this out, right? Let's see if we can get our program to run. Just to see if everything has been set up properly. And actually it is not. So if I hit F5 right now, we actually get some build errors. And before we even get to the build errors, I need to go to my project, and we need to set up the path to the exe file that we want this we want Visual Studio to run when we start debugging. So if I go to properties within the Visual Studio project, and if I go to debugging, the command here, what we want to do is I'm going to put the solution dir. So that should get us to our root directory of our project, and we're going to go to the bin folder, and we're going to go to the main.exe. So this is the command that we're trying to run when we run our project, right? So we hit OK. So we have that good. So that should be set. Now you can see though, when I hit F5, I get these build errors. And that's because with Visual Studio by default, it's going to build our project via its own default settings that it has set up for the compiler. And right now, when I do an empty project, I think it's going to default to a console application. And you can see that we have this win_main function defined. That is because if we go back to my batch file that I was using to build my project, so I had made this batch file myself to build my project, and we have the subsystem labeled as Windows within the linker. For Windows, for console applications, when you're working in the Windows environment, you could set the subsystem to console, right? So that's another option you can use. But if I do that, that means I have to change this win_main. So this win_main function is only used when you specify the subsystem Windows. So again, if I were to try and build this with that batch file that I set to console, it does not recognize that main function. So all I would do is go here, change it to main, and then I can build because it's a console application and it works. Same thing here with Visual Studio. It's set to console application, so it's going to build using its own settings, which are set to console. So now, since I changed it, I hit F5, I can run it because I changed the main function here, and now it won't complain, no compile errors, and we're all good. Now, what I actually want to do is I don't want Visual Studio to worry about building my project. Since I already had that built file, I'm going to be working out of 10x. So what I could do is just go to debug, the debug tab here in Visual Studio, and go to options. And I'm just going to search for build and run, right? And here's build and run. And you can see this is what tells Visual Studio that whenever we're running the debugger, it's saying right now to always build as well. I'm just going to tell it to never build. Now, you don't have, again, it depends on what you want to do for your project. This is just a little side tutorial lesson for you. So if you have a batch script like I do, you just want to run that batch script. You could probably even get Visual Studio to do it as well, to just run that script every time you run the debugger. You know, whatever. For this tutorial, I don't really care about that. I don't want it to build. I'm going to build myself from 10x and launch Visual Studio via 10x. So I'm just going to say never worry about building and hit OK. And since we had already told Visual Studio where to find our project, our exe, which is in that bin folder, that's where it's going to look. So even though, so you can see when it originally built our project, it created its own folder to store it in, which is x64 debug. And here's the tutorial project exe that it was actually building before. But again, we don't want to use that. So I'm just going to delete it. And now we can still set that breakpoint in here, hit F5, and it's going to find that exe within the bin folder that I had specified, and it's still able to run. So there's a quick lesson for you in case you weren't aware of kind of some of the inner workings of Visual Studio for some of the things that it does. That's one quick note there. All right, now to the main stuff. So what we ultimately want to do is to run this from from 10x. So I think I can even close, I think it'll open it up. So I can just close this out, right? I have that solution, so it's in there now. And if we go back to 10x, if we set a breakpoint here and we want to say start debugging, you can see that nothing has happened. So if we open up the 10x output window and we just check to see, the result was -1. So this is because we haven't set our workspace settings properly. So this was for the remedy file. The remedy tutorial we were doing. We had to set commands in an exe path. So I'm just going to remove that stuff. That's not going to be needed for Visual Studio. You can see there's a place for the solution file that we can put in 10x. So I'm actually going to put that solution file here now. We won't worry about this. We're building with the way we're building. I don't think I need to check that box there. We have this tutorial solution set within that debug solution field. Okay, so now that that is set, let's try and run the start debugging command again. Now you can see Visual Studio had opened up because we didn't have it already open. So it did open. Now it might have run, but nothing happened, right? So if I try that again, it says it's attempting to connect to Visual Studio and nothing's happening. So I don't even think it's running, right? It's just attempting to connect to Visual Studio, but nothing's going on here. It's because there's one more thing we got to do. And actually, let's see, it did. Yeah, failed to start up project, even though connected. So there's one more thing we have to do, and it actually tells you a hint here to download the extension. So if we go to the website for 10x, so I'll just pull that up here, and we go to resources, and where is it? Is it documentation? You can see there's a Visual Studio debugger syncing. So if we click that, it'll kind of give you a quick description of how to use the Visual Studio debugger. You can see it actually has an option for Visual Studio Sync that needs to be set. I believe that's set by default. So if I go here, just close that out. If I go to my settings file and we'll say visuals. Okay, so Visual Studio Sync is set to true. So that's not the problem, right? We already have that set, so that should be fine. But the other big thing here is that we need this 10x editor link. This is just a, what is that? The VisX extensions that you can install in Visual Studio. So this is one of the things that we need to do now to also get 10x to work with Visual Studio. So we need to download this extension. All right, so we're going to go ahead and download it. And that pulls up. Now, I actually downloaded it twice. Let's see if I can get this over here. Okay, so we could see that VSIX file. This is for Visual Studio. This is for some extensions that we can download. All I can do, and I believe I have to have Visual Studio closed for this to work. So we'll close this out, double click it, and it's going to initialize, and it's going to say Visual Studio Community 2022. Do you want to install this? We'll say install. Okay, and it's installed. So we have that extension now installed with Visual Studio. So if we go back to our 10x project, again, Visual Studio is now closed. If we go to start debugging, we're going to open Visual Studio. Boom, there you go. So you can see, because we have the breakpoint set in 10x, that has also been set here. So I can end this session. This is just a debug console window. And now I can go back and remove this breakpoint. And if I go back to Visual Studio, the breakpoint is gone. Same thing, I can add a breakpoint here, go back to 10x, and the breakpoint is there. So everything is now synced since we added that extension. And we can do the same things that we were doing with the Remedy debugger. So, right, we could set breakpoints in this 10x exe, and then we can hit F5. I'm sorry, not F5, because I have that attached to Remedy still. But if we do the start debugging command, it'll go back to Visual Studio. And in case you didn't watch the Remedy part, you can do start debugging, restart debugging, and stop debugging. So if we had this, all right, so let's say we were here and we hit start debugging. We're in Visual Studio, and then we came back to 10x. We can do restart debugging, right? And that'll restart the debugger, and then we can also stop the debugging process from 10x, and that'll stop it, right? I don't think out of the box right now 10x has the ability to step through the debugger with like there's not a step over command here with 10x and to move this down and sync with the editor. It might be added in the future. I think right now those are the main functions that you have: start debugging, stop debugging. The nice thing about it obviously is that you can work in 10x, set these breakpoints, you can remove the breakpoints. They will be removed from Visual Studio once you click over to it. So everything is kind of synced in that way. And then again, while you're working the editor, you can just go ahead and run the Visual Studio debugger from 10x. You can set it to your key mappings, right? So we can go here into key mappings. Now, I had this set to Remedy to do the debugging stuff. If we wanted to use Visual Studio for F5, for example, I could just say start debugging, use that command every time I hit F5. So we'll just save that, hit F5, and now I can just start debugging via F5. And okay. All right, so I think those are really some of the main things I wanted to show with the 10x editor. I went into maybe a little more depth than some of the videos that are currently out there for 10x. So hopefully that helped you out. One last thing I'll mention is you have, if you need to ask the developer for this program any questions or things like that, he does have a Discord channel. So you can go on Discord and ask him some things. So let's see if I have it open here. I can just show you real quick. Right. Okay. All right, so we have the 10x Discord channel, and his name is Stuart. Okay, so Stuart Lynch is the developer for this program. So he's very active, and he answers a lot of questions to help people out and that kind of thing. So again, and there's also a community here that will help you out if you have specific questions on it. They've been very helpful for me, and I know they will be for you. So you can certainly join that if you want, and I believe that's also a link via the website to get to and get invited. So you can do that if you want. Other than that, thanks for joining me, and see you guys later.